Hello, we are live with Makiyah Moody. Oh, we have a little echo. Do you hear that echo? Are you okay?
I think I'm all right.
All right, great. This is the joys of technology, which is not necessarily my strong point, but here we are. For those of you who don't know, I'm Beth Napleton, and I am an expert in working with leaders and mission-driven organizations to help them reach their goals. And so as someone who loves thinking about leadership and all its complexities, I do these lives mostly every week to learn about lessons of leadership from a variety of perspectives. And I am so excited to have Makiyah Moody here today, who I think I've known for since 2004, 5?
Yeah,
Many
we're stacking on a couple of decades, I think.
Yes, that's incredible because it feels like that. And it's like, I think even we were talking before this, it's like, when did we meet? It's like one of those great friendships where you like can't exactly even pinpoint it, but like it feels like I've always known you. So, and through many seasons of life. And so I feel like when we met, you were working at the KIPP Foundation, working on the KIPP School Summit. The first one, the second one,
It was the first one I worked on was in New Orleans. So I think it was 2006.
Oh, got it. Great. I love that one. I have many fond memories of that.
And as do I. Common was there. I got to walk with Common in the elevator of the Marriott on Canal Street.
I missed that. Are you kidding?
No, he was there. He had published a book.
Wow. That was the year I won the Kinder Award. And so my parents flew down and surprised me. There was a lot of drinking at Pat O'Brien's that night, which I still think of fondly every time I go to New Orleans.
Memories.
I mean, it was really great. It was great. And I think of it every time I pass that hotel, I always think of that summit, which might've been my last KIPP School Summit actually. Or maybe I had one more after that because then I moved from North Carolina to Chicago. Is that what I did? And then I started working at the school in Gary. And then you came to work at the school in Gary and we got to work together there for a snippet of time. And then we lived in the same city, which was very exciting. And that had not happened in a while. And then I moved and, you have done a ton of things from them. And I don't want to mess up the description of what you've done career-wise. And so do you want to just like give a quick overview of what you did? Because then you went from Gary to consulting, right?
No. So So when we met in the peanut field in Gaston, I think I was there for barn raising when I had joined the foundation team. And it was great to kind of actually be able to like absorb KIPP Gaston College Prep and just see what was at play there, what was in the works. But after I left the KIPP Foundation, I went to the school in Gary for, I believe, 3.5 years, doing development and operations work. And then when I left there, I had moved to New Orleans to be the founding executive director at Leading Educators. And so I was an ED for a few years and working to support teacher leadership and capacity building in schools, and then transitioned to the State Charter School Association in Louisiana, where I had the good fortune of really digging in on board development and governance and helping to support charter school boards, which is also how I crossed paths with BoardSource and became certified in their trainings related to governance. And then back in 2016, I moved back to New Hampshire, which is where I grew up. And that's when I started working in consulting. And I was at a firm for about 5.5, 6 years. And then last summer decided to plant my own garden at Kairos and Hart. And that brings us up to date.
I mean, I feel like it just is I'm like, oh, right. I forgot all of New Orleans in that time. I've been leading educators. Like, how is that possible? But also it's been a lot of years. Like it's getting up to half of our lives. Like we're getting close to that. We have a pivot point in the next few years where we can celebrate that we've been friends for half our life. So it is awesome to have you here because I think you have such great experience from your board work, from your work as an ED. You worked in schools, you worked at a foundation, you've just worked in so many spaces and it's been so impactful. So let's indulge and go back to when we met on the peanut field in Gaston. And we always loved having visitors in my rural school in North Carolina. It was like very exciting. We go out for dinner. Did we go to Tolteca maybe? That was like our go-to.
Sounds familiar.
Come out for Mexican food. It will not be the best Mexican food you've ever had. Somebody visiting from Chicago or San Francisco, but it will be full of great conversations. So that was definitely true. So when you think about your leadership journey, what was going on for you at that point in time when you joined the foundation and were kind of coming there? What were you really kind of learning and figuring out then?
I would characterize it. I've been thinking a lot about nature and lessons from nature since I'm reading some work by Adrienne Marie Brown. And I think that if I were to think about the evolution of a butterfly, my entry point into education, air quotes, education reform, and the KIPP Foundation was really, I think, a point of inflection and curiosity. And also, as I reflect on, the last 20 years and learnings and unlearnings of mine, I think what was happening for me is that I was very green in not necessarily understanding like the politics behind education. Like who decides, who has access and who doesn't, who's determining, resource flow, who's determining school closures and why. Like there were a lot of, I think, lessons that I wasn't fully grasping in my mid 20s that now in my mid-ish 40s, it's like, oh, I didn't interrogate my world the way that I should have. And now I'm much more critical and discerning about kind of like what's said and then what's done. And when the audio doesn't actually match the video in organizations, in my own life, just like the values alignment. So I would say that what was happening for me then is I think I was starting to sprout and like blossom. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, I am more deeply rooted in my truth and the full-throated version of myself.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because I love that the audio doesn't match the video. I'm going to steal that. I think that's a great way to just describe those gaps that exist and, that are just, it's interesting too, right? Because I think like, is part of it just in the journey? Like, could you have known what you know now then? Like you have 20 years experience, like you've seen the world from such a variety of perspectives. And I sometimes think about how naive I was about like what could really change and make an impact. And in some ways, I actually think that naivety drove like really great teaching and impactful work with kids and awesome stuff. But in other ways, it just feels like such a drop in a bucket of this larger, totally screwed up system. So I don't know. I sometimes miss that beginning of the journey, but it's like, but also I'm so much more effective now because of what I know and what I've seen.
No, I definitely think you have to take the walk to actually be able to reflect on the learnings and understand what worked or what didn't. And I think I've become much more, with the benefit of coaching and just like life lessons, I think I've become much more reflective on what I'm learning in different circumstances and seasons of my life, rather than having a predetermined success point or destination. That like the journey is in itself like the work that you need to do, I think, to be a full human in all of our multitudes, that you actually need to, have the highs, have the lows, have I really screwed that up. I was about to drop a bomb.
You're among friends here.
Yeah, like I really screwed that up. How do I repair harm? I think I've become more kind of cognizant and aware of like what the impact is that I might be contributing to, rather than what I might think rather than what my intent is.
Yes, thinking.
And I think that's like a headline I think that everyone should grapple with. Just like making sure that you're living in your truth and also thinking about what's necessary for the collective to also flourish and thrive while you're thriving yourself.
So true. It's so true. You are always been so reflective and so wise and thoughtful. And I just feel like now it's like even more so, right? It's like with the benefit of, I don't know, so much experience. It's just, I feel like, do you write? You should write.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Beth, because for the last 2.5 years, I've been working on a book draft.
Are you serious?
I am. And I have these starts and stops where there's so much that I do want to say. I'm looking above because I think there's a quote by Zora Neale Hurston that talks about how, like, if you have a story, like, shut up inside your bones, like it's your responsibility to get it out in the world. And I think that there are plenty of stories. And my friend Sarah Hamill Spite will remind me often of all of the journals that I have from elementary school to present day and how I need to, do something with that. And so, yeah, there's some writing happening and some other creative endeavors to really, I think, reflect and make sense of like the past, the present, and the kind of future that I want to create and the kind of future that I think we deserve as full humans. Also channeling Adrienne Marie Brown again, just like this notion of radical imagination and how the world that we want to live in doesn't exist yet. And so how is it that we are going to change how we are and how we show up in order to create that world?
And you've always been, I think, both reflective and you really have taken time for your own creativity and to nurture that and to kind of think about how that expresses and then how does that translate into, I mean, exactly the kind of world that we want. So I love it. I mean, I just think of you as such an artist, right? Even though like, I don't know that we've ever done anything resembling like art, like painting, no like bodega painting wine nights. No, like we'll add those to the list, like nothing in that way, but it's part of how I spiritually think about you.
Yeah, there's plenty of art. Art and creative pursuits are, I've found them to be much more healing in this season of this pandemic.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So when you think about, I mean, you've been on your leadership journey for many, many years. Is there anything that used to really work for you in leadership that doesn't quite work anymore? You've had to kind of grow and adapt. And, you know, I think sometimes we think about things, it's like, oh, this really still works for me. But honestly, I think especially as we, dare I say, get on in our years, sometimes there are things that are like, it just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, there's so many. I feel like each day is an opportunity to reinvent and recreate, and to unlearn and learn anew. So something that no longer serves me, as far as like the leadership model or myth, I think that when I was starting out in professional settings, there was this tendency for kind of like the norms and the default ways of operating in a, you know, white dominant heteronormative spaces, that it was just like leadership looks like this. And it was kind of like the example that would be lifted up would be possibly, you know, how a white male might do it. Or being
probably right.
Yeah. Or being really focused on kind of like process and rules and like the written word. And basically I'm talking about some of the, you know, the characteristics of white supremacy culture where we are stuck in like the one right way or this sense of perfectionism or urgency at all costs.
Urgency, yeah.
Regardless of kind of the debris that you leave behind by not investing in relationships and communication and actually getting proximate to people to understand what their truths are and what they're experiencing. And so something that no longer serves me, I think, is the frame that I need to have answers. I have plenty of experience and I'd like to say that I'm an expert in myself. And while I know things about boards and governance, I don't often don myself as like an expert in anything because I feel like there's collective genius that everyone has based on the paths they've walked. But I think coming out of graduate school, you know, University of Chicago was very like academic and just I learned a ton. And I think it also had me much more in my head and not in my heart. And so shout out to one of my coaches, Ian Escabel, because over the last couple of years, he's helped me think about like shortening the distance between my head and my heart and like really feeling like going with my intuition, reclaiming my intuition, getting still to understand like what my knowing is versus the noise that I will hear outside about like what success looks like. Like who decides what success? Like, who gets to be the shot caller on like what success means to an individual? So I think that for me, I've been re-scripting and rewriting the narrative around what leadership looks like and in what context, and trying to operate from a place of the values that sustain me, and really orienting towards a mindset of abundance, because I think we're often by default, our reptilian brain, I think it just misserves us because we're focused on like what's not working and we criticize
and scramble and push everyone aside. And
it's like me over everything else, rather than if we don't have a planet, I don't really matter. Like, you know, if I can't have good drinking water, like, you know, and so I think just this notion of abundance, rather than a zero-sum game where we're all fighting for scraps, like there's plenty. There's plenty, full stop. And so I think leadership for me is more focused on thinking about like where the assets are to build from as a collective within an organization or with people I'm partnering with, rather than kind of like the segmentation of you're just in this peg because you're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. Like I want to see what mosaic are we going to create together. So I think leadership through co-creation is probably where I am right now.
That is really resonant. And I think that it's interesting because I know on your website you had a link. I think you still have this link to the white supremacy at work kind of culture. It's like a thought piece or an article. And I think when I found that on your website and read it, it was just so helpful to, I think, put, words to what we have experienced and thinking about how do we lead differently and what does this look like as we, because I think that there is so much reflection in these years on like, wait, why? Who? What the hell was that? And so how do you like pause? I mean, what do you say? Say still in the knowing, right? Like just kind of how do you sit in there, like say, where is that? And then how do we move forward together in a better way? And hand in hand with, the people most proximate, right? And communities that we serve. Like, I feel like people have used the phrase communities we serve for a long time, but like, is it actually service leadership? Is it actually getting close to where the issues are? And yeah. So eloquent. I'm so excited for your book. I also am not even sure that I knew you went to graduate school, but it all makes sense. Hyde Park, you were in Chicago. Like it must have predated us.
It did.
Barely. Yeah. I think I must have known that at some point.
Yeah.
At your apartment in Hyde Park. I just like, it's funny when you're like graduate school. I was like graduate school.
Yeah. No, it was definitely pre us connecting. I moved to Chicago in 2000. I was in school 01 to 02. So yeah, it was a few years before we would have crossed paths.
A few years before the greatness that ensued.
Yeah.
I love it. So what about a time that you have learned a leadership lesson in like a profound, like, it's interesting. Like we just talked a lot about like when you reflect on things and they come to this core and you're like learning and synthesizing. And then sometimes it's like, boom, it just like smacks you in the face. It's just like really vivid, really memorable. And like, you just learn a lesson. It's like the universe is shouting so loudly at you, you cannot ignore it. And you learn that lesson in a really profound way. Tell me about a time like that.
I feel like there's a number of examples. I think the one that I will draw from, which is the springboard to Kairos and Heart coming into existence and being birthed, is when I commit to something, whether I say like, I'm going to do this project or, I'm going to take this on or I'll be here or whatever. It's like my word is my bond. And so when I commit to working on a project or just different commitments around how I'm going to use my time and manage my energy, et cetera, in service to something or, whatnot, it really like weighs heavy. And I have these expectations for myself where the bar is set very high. And I've been deconditioning myself from that notion that like attaining perfection is even what I'm trying to do. And so I think the leadership lesson that I'm kind of slowly getting to is related to during the pandemic, like right as it was starting to kind of ramp up, I was at this point of inflection about how I wanted to use my time, if I was in the right place as far as like professional career, et cetera. Were there other paths that I wanted to pursue? And there was like this little whisper that I had probably for maybe like 2.5 years before I launched my LLC. That was just like, other choices are possible. There's a big world out there. How do you want to design your life? And there's a quote in Edgar Villanueva's book, Decolonizing Wealth, that talks about design choices and how, like, what would it look like if organizations focused on reciprocity and connection and interdependence instead of, like, say, like exploitation, extraction, hierarchy. I'm paraphrasing, but it, like, reading his words made me think, like, what would my life look like if I was focused on those things and not kind of like the rat race of capitalism says you need to have this much in your bank account and you need to do all these things because you are like part of a cog in a wheel that's trying to produce. And so I think the leadership lesson was I had been kind of muting these little messages I was getting. And then I went to New York one weekend to visit a friend, and we were kind of having like one of those heart to hearts. And it's like right as the pandemic's ramping up. And it just kind of like was a gut punch of like, no, you actually need to choose something different. Like you are the chooser. Like don't give in to the idea that, you know, there's all these forces that are kind of like bigger than you, and like stability is so important. And, you know, there was like a lot of fears that were kind of kicking around for me. And eventually working through another one of my coaches, Idrissa, it was helpful to just like name the fears and name kind of what the like mental models were that I was amplifying and turning up the volume on that really weren't, you know, like, sure, like they could be a thing. And I'm also resourceful, and I've also got a dynamite tribe, and I also have, you know, like so many other things that are going to work out. And so I guess I'm like kind of conflating a lot of different points, but I think the leadership lesson is to bet on yourself, trust your knowing. And it took me a couple of like starts and stops to just like get clear on what my gut was telling me to do.
Well, and it sounds like, you know, part of what I also take from this is like, when you hear that whisper, listen. Like, is it like Oprah says something like, basically like the whisper will just turn louder and louder until you can't ignore it. And so it really serves you to listen when she doesn't say this part, but I'm sure she would. It's like, you know, if you listen when it's a whisper, right. And just like honor that part of yourself, because that's something that's like really true that's coming out. Right. And so yeah. I did not realize that was all happening. I mean, I knew you launched last summer, which was like the first summer of the pandemic, or the second summer of the pandemic?
No, these seeds were being watered and nurtured for a good like 2 years. So I didn't launch until August 24th of 2021.
Got it. Okay. Got it. So kind of that nurturing, and I think there's just a lot of, I mean, I don't know, a coach of mine, Erica Jordan Thomas, since we're shouting out all the wonderful people who help us get to where we are, talks a lot about mind trash, right? And just like we were saying, the messages in your mind that either get amplified or your belief system. And it's like, how do you stop and interrogate what those are and be like, what's actually really true to me, right? And what do I value? Excellent. So we both care a lot about equity and justice. And, you know, I think there's a whole separate conversation about the last 20 years and how far is the needle actually moving, and are we making the progress necessary? To what extent have we gone backwards? But, you know, I guess what I would love to know is like, you know, when you think about, you know, quote unquote, like issues of diversity and equity and inclusion, and right, like, what are you thinking about? Where are you at right now? Like, what actions are you taking? What are you thinking about? Like, what's on your mind? Because I feel like that will really help. You always have helped me move along this continuum.
Yeah, I think I am leaning into Black joy, and leaning into the realities of a very rich ancestral background that is more than fire hoses and Jim Crow and other things that seem to be like really amplified quite often. Like Black trauma, for example, kind of gets a lot of airtime versus like the realities of, you know, the things that are actually like fueling and restorative and nourishing. And so not to discount those realities, but I think where I'm doing my work is to really be able to zero in on that which is healing and healthy, rather than like the constant bombardment of not being enough. So like what's coming up for me when you ask this question, the first thought was related to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and the garbage over the last few days related to these hearings, and just the type of questioning and discounting and dismissing of her Black brilliance. And so, yeah, I mean, I think on the big picture, I think that we, humanity, needs to focus a little bit more on not just reading books and figuring out what the syllabus is related to creating a world where we can all flourish and thrive, but that there's actually something about transformation So like,
Mm,
how is it that we are going to actually do differently and be different
mm,
in
mhm,
our actions and in our interactions, rather than kind of thinking that it's like some other people that need to do all the changing. Um,
mm,
and so one of the things for me, I think it was maybe 6 months ago, I did a series with Kelsey Blackwell, who is a somatic abolitionist in Oakland, and it was called Decolonizing the Body. And it was a cohort of women of color focusing on how to like decolonize from white supremacy. And a lot of the work, I think, and reflection was focused on like just naming and acknowledging internalized racism, some of the messages that are kind of like codified on
mm,
us, and how to figure out how to reject them and dismantle them, and then kind of restock with um, insights and wisdom that are grounded in like our humanity rather
mm,
than what the world might share and reflect back as like
mhm,
the brokenness
mhm,
of my
mhm.
community.
Well, and I wonder, like, like, I don't know if you've been watching the hearings live or seeing this, but I think a lot of it's like, just incredibly triggering and incredibly just dismaying. And like, I mean, in some ways it's disorienting with the Republican, you know what I mean? Yeah, there's a lot of work to do.
That is very true.
A lot of work to do. Yeah, it's interesting. Um, it's like my daughter is very into current events. She like reads her little like the Week Junior, and it's very into it. So we've been talking about it, and she's in school during the hearings, and we haven't really watched much of it, but she's been wanting to, and we've been talking about it. And I have such vivid memories of watching Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas in like 1992 when I was in middle school. She's like in 4th grade, but it's interesting. Like in some ways, I think about these moments, and I think like, wow, there's a lot to unpack there, but it's like, have you done anything in the you know what I mean? Like it just is. It can be a little dispiriting, but even more reason to like, what heals me? What do I need? How do I renourish? And like, how do I act in a world that helps make it more equitable? All right, well, let's switch to the area of, I mean, I really am thinking a lot about this idea of I don't call myself an expert, because I think it's really interesting. And it's interesting because I do call myself an expert because I read a book by a crusty old white guy. And so now I'm like, and it's about like, position yourself and do this, and here's how you blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, so interesting. So interesting. But I think you have vast expertise, let's put it this way, from a multitude of perspectives, right? From kind of the board work on the ED side and kind of, different, foundations and programs, et cetera, about strategic planning. And I feel like this is an area that people often want to talk about as leaders because it's just so important, right? And so, I mean, I think maybe, you tell me, but I think that it's, I'd love to kind of hear maybe first, like, just like your big picture thought, like how important is this? I mean, you do this the majority of your time. So I'm going to say, right, my understanding is that. So I'm going to say that it's probably pretty important, or why, a little bit of that. And then I'd love to get into some advice that you would give.
Mm-hmm. So specifically on strategic planning, that's what you're probing on. Well, I think that having a game plan or a roadmap is just critical to keep people and organizations honest. And so I will share, I think it's a metaphor, maybe. At the end of every year, I do a little arts and crafts session with myself. It's like my very own executive session to think about the year that I want to kind of conjure with the change of the calendar year. And so I go through the process of mapping out kind of a vision board and thinking through, I'm trying to see, they're like,
yeah, those
there they are, my anchors. But like mapping out a vision board so that I can kind of make clear and affirm what it is that I want to create and where I want to invest my time and my energy and my focus. I think the same thing, and I also choose 2 words that are going to like be the headline for the year. So my 2 words for this year are savor, because I realized that I was like wrapped up in the capitalistic, we're just going to keep on producing, don't rest, you've got to run. And now I'm like, not really. I want to saunter. I want to savor the moments that are creating this magical life that I have. And then the other word is surrender. And so that kind of ties to my faith journey, and also realizing that there's some things that are not my burden to bear. And so what's the process to release them and kind of surrender? So savor and surrender, and then clarity on how I want to invest my time and my focus. I think the same thing applies to organizations when they need to think about like what's the path that they're trying to chart and what kind of future they want to create for the people working in their organization, for the stakeholders, for the community, whatever it is that their mission is. There should be something that's undergirding that is actually, we're going to be investing in these 5 areas or these 3 areas. I think it's a clarifying exercise for organizations to actually get still and think about how they want to advance their reason for being in the world.
So can I tell you something, which is I pick one word a year. And I have my little like word bracelet or whatever, but here is what's free. And I only started this last year. And you know what my word was last year? Surrender. Isn't that interesting?
That is.
Which for me was less about faith, but more about acceptance after a challenging 2020. And so it was a great word for the year.
I think it's powerful just to even visualize and name an intention. Like pre-pandemic, I was really into Bikram yoga. And I love like what yoga can do in all the dimensions, as far as your mental energy, spiritual, the physical, the emotional. Like it was a phenomenal resource. And the instructor would always say, so, you know, like we're on our mats and it's like, let's set your intention for our time together. And it was just this individual reflection, but it's like actually stopping to set an intention, I think is just like a really great practice. And so I'm happy to hear that your word was surrender, and that, I think it's valuable.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes, like, I think that sometimes there's a mistaken idea that for like, you know, it's like complexifying things. And actually there is such like, I mean, I think about as a teacher, I use this a lot as a tool, is like synthesize down to one word or like encapsulate this in 3 words. And it's like, that's actually way more, from a teaching perspective, it's more rigorous and it's really harder. It's like much easier to produce 100-page report on what we should do than to boil it down to 10 words or a paragraph or a bullet point, right? Like, and there's a lot of really good work organizationally that goes on when you're like, we're actually not going to do the other 99 and a half. We're just going to focus in on that North Star and actually make some traction on it. So yeah, it's really good. I do a lot of also, I think you meditate a little bit, right? I feel like I've recently come to meditating in like the past 3 or 4 years. But I do, one of my favorite things is like to do a morning meditation with like daily intention setting or weekly intentions, or those are always, I think, just like a really good grounding point. So
yeah, it's powerful. I think protecting your mental energy and just, I think you called it mind trash. And I think of it as
out the mind trash. You don't want to protect the mind trash.
Right. It's just like managing your space in a way that we can like declutter and move the debris or the mind trash out. I think whatever practices work for folks. Sometimes for me, it's a long run, or it's, an impromptu dance party. But I think it's important to have those moments where you're actually getting still and quieting the noise.
And I like this idea of organizations getting still, because I think that that's not something we often think about, but you're right. That's exactly it. When it's strategic planning, they often bring in a consultant like you or I. They often get the key stakeholders together, like sit and reflect on how you're doing and, really think about, what's the landscape you're in. I know certainly a lot of places the past several years, the pandemic has, school went remote for 1.5 years. Like whoever thought that would have happened. And so like, what does that mean for moving forward and where we're at? So when you think about, leaders out there or boards out there thinking about strategic plans, what should they be thinking about? What questions should they be asking themselves, or what should they be doing?
Yeah. So I think something that you just said about schools going remote and whoever thought that would happen is a prompt for me to call out how limited our thinking is. And so as a segue to the question you just posed, I think that boards should be thinking about what's possible rather than all of the constraints that they can recite as far as like why something won't work. I think like there's a tendency for organizations and boards to kind of be stuck in current reality and status quo, or like we tried that before, it didn't work, so now we're not going to do it, or like we just need to be really incremental in what we are trying to advance, rather than, I think, what Adrienne Marie Brown lifts up around like emergent strategy and the lessons from nature. Like, how is it that we can learn from, how birds are flocking and getting information to rethink how it is that we are, allocating our resources or investing in our talent and people, or even thinking about how we make decisions. Like, I've been interrogating the idea that strategic planning is even what the board is supposed to be doing. Because ultimately, like, the board is not the entity that is really actually impacted by the work of the organization. It's generally like a volunteer position where you come and share your time, talent, and your treasure, and you try to do a good deed and help further the mission. And for me, thinking about who's most impacted by that mission work, I think those are the people who should be the shot callers and the decision makers about how the organization is going to steward their resources and make choices about programs and services, et cetera. So I think there's something new to imagine as far as what's possible related to the role of nonprofit boards and how to shift power, share power, reimagine what the power dynamics are between like the board and others within an organizational structure. Because I don't think that we've even tapped like the tip of the iceberg on what's possible, because we're so committed to what is and what was.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's interesting because probably about 10 years ago, I started, maybe a little less than that, but started working in some kind of programmatic circles about like reinventing school and self-paced learning and kind of ultimate differentiation. And why do you even need to be in a physical building, and all this work that was trying to explore what's possible. And then, I was going to say like a little something like a global pandemic happens, but it's probably a big something in the scheme of the world. But it's like this one thing, all of a sudden, like to your point, it's like the whole, just like throw out everything that you thought was true. Right. And it's interesting to think about, like when I think about schools, or when I think about, like soup kitchens, or I think about the Girl Scouts or whoever, right? Like who is impacted, who is thinking about that.
Yeah, there's actually something there too. One question I usually like to pose kind of in the vein of generative questions is like, if your organization was created today, like, what is it that you would do? How would you do it? How would you conceive of this work? Versus, well, we have a big donor who's really concerned about X. So we keep resourcing X, even though it's kind of not aligned with where we are now. Or, we took this money from a foundation that had an agenda because we really wanted the money, but it's not actually what we're about, and it's not serving like our mission. And so I think there's just a question of like the getting still part, I think requires people to kind of to free themselves from whatever mental models they're operating in, and maybe just try to dream a little bit about what it is they would build. If, resources aren't an issue, you have all the talent you need, like, what is it that you're going to be building? Yeah, I think that's a freeing invitation.
Well, and in some ways, what you're describing organizationally is very similar to what you described doing personally, right? I mean, it's like thinking about, and just that, like, what do I want to be true? What would be true, and why? How do I live to kind of create this world? And I think that, it's an interesting example to me of like why it's so important to spend time personally doing and believing and changing and acting. Because I think that it is then that like makes just like more holistic and say fruitful. I don't think fruitful is the right word, but like just more whole humans. And then we show up to work as a more whole human, and then our work is better, and we think about these things in a different way, and we're not just kind of the cog in the wheel, or punching the clock, or whatever it may be. What do you think? So, I mean, it's interesting to think about like your musings on boards now, because I think most of my experience is as a CEO working with the board, right? Which I know is a perspective you've had too. And, I actually am working with a leader now whose governance model is shifting from to a Catholic school. So shifting from like a pastor model to a board. And it's really interesting, right? Because the pastor is like, honestly, a little bit nuts. And so she's had like a lot of issues with like his agenda and whatever. And it's like, like this is not entering like some Shangri-La land of Oz. Like this is so great. It's like a little bit complicated when you've got 8 or 10 people and right, like different pieces and different agendas and different priorities and how to manage it. So we'll be working together on kind of how to think and work in partnership with them. But I would love your thoughts, for leaders on boards and thinking about, what advice you'd give or what you recommend thinking about.
Yeah, there's a couple of organizations as examples that are coming to mind. So if, I think the full name is, they used to be the Consumer Health Foundation, and they went through a strategic planning process that was kind of reestablishing their focus on racial justice and reparations and being really clear about who they serve and why, and how their grant making processes would work going forward. And they transformed their board. As far as kind of composition, representation, et cetera. So I think it's like if a foundation for radical possibility might be the rest of it. I encourage boards to look at their strategic plan, which is available on their website, and to just kind of sit with some of the full-throated and authentic ways that they have repositioned and reimagined their role as a philanthropy, as a foundation. Another example that comes to mind is Katali Foundation that has I'm just so impressed with how they think about the work of philanthropy, and how there's this kind of separation between like the board as this all-knowing entity that's going to make all the decisions rather than having this brain trust of people who are proximate to the work and to the issue areas that they're supporting. Like, a solidarity economy and a regenerative economy, and really thinking about how to build models that support and bolster communities rather than having, I think some foundations suffer from a charity mindset where it's just like, we're going to write a check and, we're not going to.
Did you mean a lot or anyway?
like we're not going to fundamentally change our practices and our behaviors or stop having you do these like 50-page applications, but we're going to like give you some crumbs and, continue to perform in the way we need you to perform so that you can continue to get the money. And I think Katali Foundation I love reading kind of their thinking and how they're approaching the work because it's reimagined and responsive, which decenters them as an institution and really promotes and amplifies their partners. So I think to answer your question about what boards should be thinking about, I think it's a question of, like looking inside to be clear on what your motivations are and why you need to hold so tightly to, how the bylaws are structured related to who even gets on the board or, how meetings work. And like, I think there's just a lot of like processes and policies that could be interrogated from a lens of, if we believe that collective genius exists, how is it that we would pull that forward rather than kind of having our egos lead us to believe that we are the experts who know best for XYZ community?
I think that visual of collective genius is really striking, right? And kind of thinking about not even like, how do you, I don't know, nurture, how do you like not rest on that. There's a word. It'll come to me. I am not the writer. You are the writer. And the comments are telling us that people are very excited for the book. So I think you've got several readers waiting, probably gajillions.
Oh, well, thank you. I feel affirmed, whoever's out there in the universe.
You're ready. It's a sign. It's ready to roll. Is there anything that you think that people, I mean, you've talked a lot and given us a lot of good food for thought on strategic planning and thinking about this. Is there anything else that you think like, people overlook this or they really I think sometimes like I can reflect on parts people really try and rush through, and it's like, just don't rush through this, because this will come to bite you. Like, this is not going to be good. It's not going to be fruitful. It's not going to reflect what you want. Checking off the box that it's done is not actually going to move the needle on what needs to happen. But I'd love to hear if there's kind of anything else you're thinking about with strategic planning.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency to avoid the tension and to sit in the discomfort of, we're actually not all on the same page about if we should set up a new scholarship fund for this particular population of students that are at our school. And I think, for example, and I think that sometimes people become more focused on figuring out how to retain control or to kind of advance their agenda per se, without taking into consideration like the breadth and depth of the issue that they might be trying to respond to. Like, there's so many ways to solve some of the problems, and there's not just one solution that's going to magically fix the things that people are concerned about. Yet it strikes me that often boards have a tendency to perhaps rush through the reflection and the imagination part. Like, I think it's really powerful. I've been working on visualizations this year. And I think it's really powerful to actually like close your eyes and try to imagine what it is that you want to build and sustain, rather than, and be in a place of creating rather than being in a place of kind of rejecting or dismissing someone else's idea. And so I think like boards can rush through not like sitting with whatever the tensions are, and can also sometimes jump over when there's a chasm between the values that people are bringing to the boardroom and not actually like lifting that up and naming it. So for instance, I am, not surprised yet ridiculously disappointed in the number of corporate and otherwise nonprofit statements related to racial justice over the last couple of years. And yet, like, fundamental change hasn't happened, even though there were lots of words. There were lots of words that were all over my LinkedIn about, how we're going to be better and different, and, yeah. And yet it's like, show me receipts, show me something that is actually different. And so I think that I feel like boards can sometimes go for the window dressing instead of like the hard, challenging, almost like gonna rip you apart inside to then be able to spring anew. Like they don't want to sit in like the muck and the mire. They just want like, oh, microwave popcorn, we've got a strategic plan, here we go. And I think there also can be a tendency to discount the experiences of staff in organizations, where like knowing the realities of like why the issue with the database is such a big deal, like that might be lost on me as a board member. And yet it could be a critical pain point for whoever your person is that needs to actually do the program monitoring and evaluation. And so I think sometimes there's just not like enough sitting with what the real issues are. And then when there's discrepancies or disagreements, like working through them in a way that still honors the wisdom and experience of the people in the room, as well as realizes that, we can figure out how to co-create something, and one of us doesn't have like all the answers to really like take us where we want to go. Like I'm kind of reminded of something from Alicia Garza's book about the purpose of power. And she talks about like movement building and how in order to have multiracial movements, that you need to be able to like be in principled struggle, essentially. Like Black people aren't a monolith. We have like very different perspectives and experiences. Like there's so much diversity like within the Black community. And yet sometimes there's like this broad brush of, like everyone gets lumped together.
Right. Yeah. Versus like it's actually very different. Right. Growing. Yeah.
And it happens with other communities as well. But I think trying to think about like the world we want to create like it's a world for all of us. So therefore, I think all of us need to be kind of, wrestling with how we're going to build it and how we're going to construct it so that there is an opportunity for everyone to have what they need to exist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, part of when you reflect on that part of this is for all of us and what do we do? One of the other pieces I often see in strategic plans is that not only do people want to rush through the reflection and the tension, but also like engagement, right? Like, I mean, to your point about like getting close to staff and the issues, getting close to students, like I think about a lot of like, we'll do a focus group and it's like, okay, I mean, that's efficient, but like you have 500 kids at this school and 500 opinions. And like, when this like, how exciting would it be to like do this vision board piece on like our future with them, right? And like what valuable insight that would give us. And like, it's not easy to do that with 500 people, but it will produce a wildly better result, right? Than, the 4 kids from student council who are great, but who are 4, not 500. I see people wanting to rush that part a lot. And maybe it also is because of the tension, right? Because like you are certainly going to get 500 different responses. And so how do you navigate and wrestle? It's mucky, to borrow a word from my writer friend, Makiyah.
Your comment about the focus groups in schools just made me think about Dr. Starsky Wilson, who's the president of the Children's Defense Fund, and often talking about like how large the population is of children and youth in this country, and they have no voice. As far as like, they don't get to vote. There's not like, really capturing kind of like their perspectives and insights and needs. And so I think that it's also, I think it's just critical for organizations to realize that it's not about you as a board member. It's like you're there as a proxy and as an amplifier or a promoter or a supporter. But it's just reminding me, like working in schools for a number of years, we rarely ask students, like, what is it that you need to be successful here? It was like, we've got Power School and this curriculum and all the things, and like teachers know best, tuck in your shirt. Like, don't get me started on compliance over critical thinking. But it's just like asking the people who are most impacted and who might have like be at the point of most need, I think is the paradigm shift that I would offer.
Yes, I feel like we had a lot to say many years ago about compliance, and I feel like that has only mushroomed, expanded, multiplied.
Yeah. Can't wait to come back, Beth. Can't wait.
Exactly. Anytime. Maybe when the book debuts. Hello.
Okay.
I am so excited about this book. I can't even tell you. All right. So we're going to switch to our lightning round of recommendations. So something I do on every episode to get kind of hear what's on your mind here. So I'll just kind of shoot them at you and be ready to roll. So what is a book that's meant a lot to you professionally you recommend? You've like name dropped about 17 books here. I always leave a conversation with you with like a robust, rich, amazing reading list that is never light reading, but is always really valuable and soul stirring. So not to make you name, you can name a few if you want to.
Awesome. Well, because I was sitting with this question and there are so many. So one of them that I already said was The Purpose of Power by Alicia Garza. I think another one would be Lovey Ajayi Jones' Professional Troublemaker.
Yes.
Because it's honestly a book that I wish I had in like my mid-20s, where sometimes you think like something doesn't feel right, but you're kind of like, oh, this is just the way it is.
You don't like the word. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's like, oh, no, that's really messed up. No, you should be paid equitably. And you're not like asking for too much when you find offer letters on a copier and realize that someone you manage is making $15,000 more than you. No, it's well within your right to flag that. You should. And so, yeah, I think some of her lessons about like, know your worth, ask for it, and then like add tax to it was really, there were so many things where I was like laughing as I read and then also writing notes to myself in the margins.
She just came out with a version of it for teens, not too long, which I feel like even when you were saying mid-20s, I was like, I know a lot of teenagers who I feel like will benefit.
Yeah. And then the last one that I'll say that I just finished, my faith journey has been kind of ramping up since I joined Trinity United Church of Christ on 95th.
Wait, do
And
you know Calvin? Do you remember Calvin from, you know,
I've,
Calvin was
I've,
the youth minister there.
I've watched him preach many a time virtually from New Hampshire.
Well,
And
the benefit of the pandemic, although maybe Trinity has probably been online for a while. But.
yeah, which was amazing to see. I think he's in Boston now, so I might actually ping him. But
yeah, no, you totally should. He's great. But I mean, he was there when you first visited the peanut field as like a 7th grader. So it's pretty cool to see. Sorry.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I feel very strongly about Trinity. I think it's an amazing place. It's an amazing work. So I have to.
Yeah. And the book that I just finished last week is tied to like the faith journey is God is a Black Woman by Christina Cleveland. And it's just a re-imaging of God. And I think it's really powerful to think about the other possibilities, because there's certain things that I've been indoctrinated with that I've like carried for my 43 years of life. And it's like a great invitation to be in a liminal space where I'm interrogating more and like keeping what I want to keep and discarding what's like, no, actually, that's not what I believe. And so I think that Dr. Cleveland does a great job of kind of like laying out her journey and her pilgrimage. She went to France and like did a walking pilgrimage of all the Black Madonnas.
Oh, wow.
Maybe not all, but a number of them. And so it's just great to kind of follow her journey and her path with that work. So those are my book recs for now.
Those are good ones. And I mean, as always. Are there other resources, podcasts, newsletters, websites? Like, I mean, I was a reading teacher, as you know, so I'm biased towards books, but there are ways to learn in other forms.
Yeah, I've been loving, and her book is on pre-order right now, I think. Dr. Tama Bryant has a podcast called Homecoming. And it's really, her voice is just so soothing. And it's just really a helpful reminder of all things mental, physical, emotional. I think the last episode I listened to was about like how to support a grieving friend. And I believe she's a psychologist. And so it's just helpful to kind of have tools and resources to actually like hold space for people, which I'm, continuing to build those tools. Another podcast is the Last Breath podcast by Dr. Tej Khalsa, which is really, she's like a peace activist and a medical doctor, like integrative medicine. And it's just been eye-opening. One of her like frameworks is feel, reveal, heal. And how we need to like to the part of like getting still, like feel what you're feeling, like name what you're feeling, be honest about it, confront it, and then figure out how to heal from it. And one of the questions that she asks in her episode is, how do I want to come alive today? And so it's like a reminder, like every moment of the day we have choices. Like, what am I leaning into? What am I focusing on? How am I like sending my energy into the world? And so I love those two podcasts. And then the last one I'll say is Lewis Howes, The School of Greatness. He has like a whole mix of, he's like a former pro athlete. He has a whole mix of guests on, and it's just cool. Like there was a neurologist on the episode I heard yesterday about sleep, how important sleep is, and like eating the right things and all the stuff. So it was, there's so much out there.
Excellent. I love it. It's funny. I have been saying all the time lately, you have to feel to heal. It's like to feel your feelings. You have to feel your feelings. So I'm like, ooh, I like this. It's a good one. How about some mentors who've meant a lot to you?
I have so many. I'm so fully resourced as I think about mentors. So I would start with, I think Idrissa Nastili Simmons, who is a vice president with Bahara. I did a leadership program with them when I moved back to New Hampshire, and just the way that she sees and affirms and loves on people is quite the model. I think she's actually helped me to confront some things where I needed to realize that it's actually like telling myself this story is actually part of the problem. Like,
Mhm.
your sense making is a little bit janky, Makiyah. So what about this? Call the thing. I think another mentor is Dr. Starsky Wilson, who I've had the pleasure of working on with a number of projects. And I love that he's a pastor as well as kind of just like this human. But there's like this wisdom that has been like an extra support to my faith journey and really like interrogating and understanding my faith. And I also think that it's helpful because he's very direct. And so there have been some meetings that I've been in where it's like, oh, that didn't really go the way I thought it was. And then it's just like very clear and direct feedback about it, which I think is a gift. And yet something like people are so conflict avoidant that they don't always speak their truth. And so I appreciate like his pouring into me in that way, as well as just like the vision he has for the Children's Defense Fund and to help contribute to a world where children and youth are able to flourish and thrive. Yeah. And then I would also add, this is like a mentor from afar who I am like studying and cannot wait to actually meet in person. And so I'm manifesting that right now. But Dr. Carmen Rojas from the Marguerite Casey Foundation, she's the president there. And I had the opportunity 2 years ago to interview her and Dr. Wilson about philanthropy. And it's like, it was based on Begin Again by Eddie Glaude Jr., his book about like James Baldwin and the lessons for America. I'm missing up the title. But just being able to witness their discourse and conversation about like where philanthropy is falling short and like what other design choices are possible was just like, so it was so incredible. Like I go back and watch the video often. And I just think that the way that she authentically and boldly steps in and owns kind of her vision for like creating a better world is just, it's phenomenal. And you should follow them on LinkedIn because she is always giving away books for their book series of guest speakers that they're going to have. Awesome. And so, yeah, anyway, I think that she's just phenomenal. She is, yeah, she's fire. And I love watching her because then it's like I get to take notes and think about how to pull some of that forward.
I love it. And I feel like now I can add to my book list, like my Makiyah book list, Makiyah mentor list. Like, and I mean, it's interesting. The Children's Defense Fund, I feel like was one of those organizations that has always called to me, like Mary Edelman. And then I like thought about going to law school for a while in politics, and that was not my speed, but I still love them. And it's an important role to balance. All right. Last question. What is something you are loving in your life right now? Can be anything.
Well, let's see. I am loving that I have kind of rediscovered that I own my life. I think like Issa Rae is coming to mind when she said, you know, it's a me season. And I am just like leaning into this me season of mine. And so I'm loving that kind of epiphany, as well as loving the flexibility of working from different places. Like I'm heading to Chicago tonight. And yeah, just being able to actually have time and space to kind of process and savor and not feel this pull of this is what success means. Like, I feel like I've been able to like silence some of the noise related to like what success is and what kind of life I should be living. And it's like, let me design it. So I'm loving that. Freedom and flexibility is what I'm loving.
I'm just loving it. It's good food for thought always. I feel like people will say a variety of things and it's always just so revealing about kind of where they're at. So, I mean, this is amazing. Thank you so much. I had so much fun. I'm so excited for the book, as previously stated, and for you to come back and to continue to talk. It's amazing. And I think to all the folks who are watching live or watching the replay or listening to the podcast, I'm sure you were taking furious notes just as I was the whole time from Makiyah. So if you liked these gems, you can check out my website at bethnapleton.com. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. And if you are thinking about, Makiyah is I believe no longer taking clients this year. She is in a period of abundance, speaking of, at Kairos and Heart. Although I really recommend going to her website to check out the resources that are linked as well. But if you are like, I'm thinking about strategic planning or how do I do this and what do I do? Please go to the website, bethnapleton.com, book a call with me, and we can talk about this possibility. There's a lot of richness here, and as the benefit of this conversation, I think I'll be bringing some new perspective to it in a way that is really wonderful. So thank you for that gift, Makiyah. It's funny. You talked about feedback, and like one of the things I used to always say, right, is like feedback is a gift. People don't always think that, but it's a gift. People speak their truth. They see that it helps. It's data. It helps us move forward. And I just feel like you have given many, many gifts today. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, it'll be cut back, so don't worry.
Awesome. See you later.